Hey guys, how's it going? In this video I'm going to show you how I set up my Hope 25 wheels with all the components I chose and any little quirks and features that I discovered along the way. So I taped up the wheels using the supplied Hope tape you may have seen in the previous videos. The video didn't come out very good for this, so please excuse me for not submitting it in this video. So first thing I need to do is poke a hole for the valve to go through, and I want to give you a top tip here, and that's not to use a knife to cut an X through this, as it's a good point of failure if you cut an X through. The best thing to use is like a sharpened screwdriver or a pick or something along those lines. Small, round and sharp. You can see there's my sharpened up screwdriver here. Looks a bit dodgy, but it's perfect for setting up tubeless valves. So you just poke a little tiny hole through with one of these, and it's much more successful and much less likely point of failure in the tape if you do this. Next thing I'm going to do is grab a valve and poke it through the hole. The valves I've gone through here are the Peaty's times Chris King tubeless valves. Their purple colour matches the Hope hubs very nicely, so that's why I've gone for them. So with only a small hole poked in the rim tape, you kind of have to force the valve through, but it makes the opening in the rim tape as small as possible for the valve, and that's why it's less likely to cause a failure at this point. With the valve poked through, I can then pop the little O-ring seal over the top of the valve and then put the valve nut down onto the threaded section. I like to get this valve nut very snug, but only using my fingers, so yeah, really winch on it as much as you can with your fingers, but don't go for the tools. That's about the right tightness. With the valve snugged up, I am now going to extract the valve core using the valve cap that comes with these Peaty's valves. One of the nice things about them, they come with an integrated valve core tool, so you always have it handy. Next we can move on to installing the tyres. The tyres I'm going to be installing are the WTB Exposure 30Cs with the tan walls. So off camera I've popped the tyre I've chosen onto the rim. It was relatively easy to fit, and I've ensured that it's sitting in the centre gully of the rim to make sure it's all nice and snug. Next I'm going to load up the Specialized Air Blaster tool with about 120 psi. This is a pressure container which blasts air into the tyre, making seating of the bead easier. And finally, before I jump in and let the air rip, I'm just doubly making sure that the bead of the tyre is sitting in the centre gully of the rim. This is one of the key tricks to getting tubeless tyres to seat. I like to hold on to the valve head of the pump onto the valve to make sure it doesn't shoot off, and it also ensures that the air doesn't shoot round the side of the tyre as well. So for me, I think that went pretty well. You can hear the tyre bead popping into place against the rim, and it didn't require any lubrication or any other nonsense to get the tyre to seat properly, and looks like we've got a good combo of the WTB tyre and Hope rim at the moment. So I removed the Specialized Air Blast tool off camera and let all the air rush out. The tyre stayed in place. I'm just going to pop the valve core back into the valve, and then I'm going to inflate it to like 80 psi, which is the maximum recommended for the tyre, and make sure it's fully home and seated correctly. I'm then going to leave it for half an hour and work on the front and make sure it stays inflated, or keep some pressure at least, then chuck some sealant in it. So half an hour later it retained its pressure pretty good. I'm going to chuck some tubeless sealant. I'm going to use this muc-off stuff because it's pretty good, I think, in my experience, and it's easily available from Amazon. That's why I tend to pick it up from. I've let the pressure out of the tyre and popped the valve core out once again, and I've set up the tyres on these Hope boxes because this bit can get messy if you're not careful. I'm going to squeeze in about 100 to 120 mils because this is the first time with these tyres. So yeah, this is a big bottle, it's a litre bottle, so there's plenty to go around, and just squirt it in there. This big bottle of tubeless sealant has a level indicator at the side marking off how much you've squirted in. It's got a clear window so with measurements against it, so you can see how much you've inserted into your tyres. So next is a demonstration as why I would always recommend setting up these tubeless systems on some tarpaulin or disposable surface. When I picked the wheel up there, I pressed the tyre accidentally and the pressure increase squirted the sealant out of the valve, what was remaining in the valve, and yeah, made an absolute mess. So yeah, always set up tubeless tyres somewhere you don't mind getting mucky or somewhere disposable. I'm just going to pop the valve core back into the valve stem now because I don't want any more escaping, and I'm going to clean up this mess before it spreads absolutely everywhere. So for the final time we can inflate the tyre. I'm going to wind it all the way up to 80 psi, which is the maximum this tyre can take. It'll probably leak down a touch overnight because the sealant is sealing up all the little tiny micro pores within the tyre. Once we're up to pressure, I'm going to take the pump off, visually inspect the tyre to make sure it's seated correctly and as desired, and pop the valve cap back on. And finally I'm going to spin the tyre a lot and at different orientations to make sure all the sealant is giving the inside of the rim and tyre a real nice coating. Once this was done, I repeated the process for the front tyre. The next thing we're going to do is install the brake discs. I've got centre lock ones on this, so first thing I must do is apply a little spot of grease onto the centre lock nut we've got here. Just a little blob will do fine. So centre lock discs are very easy to install. You just line up the splines and insert it onto the hub. As you can see, I've gone for the fancy black Dura Ace ones, which I think looks great against the purple hub. You then take the lock nut and screw it into position. You have to be a bit careful here because it's quite easy to cross thread these if you're not careful, so make sure you're all lined up and not forcing it. Just wind it in gently by hand to get it started. For the Shimano Dura Ace rotors, the centre lock nut is done up with a cassette tool. So I'm just going to snug this up by hand with a cassette tool to start with. Then I'm going to pop it onto a 1/2 inch drive little tiny breaker bar I got here to really snug her up nicely. And finally, I'll pop the cassette tool onto a 1/2 inch torque wrench and tighten it up to 40 Newton meters, which is surprisingly tight. So there was one quirk I found when installing the disc on the front hub, and that is I couldn't get my cassette tool in the gap between the 12mm adapter and the nut for the disc. The cassette tool wasn't quite deep enough to reach into the splines around the 12mm hub adapter. But this was very easily remedied on these hubs, and I'll show you how I did it. First off, I removed the nut and then the disc to get back to like a naked wheel effectively. I then removed the 12mm axle adapter from the disc guide, which is very easy on these hubs. This then created the space needed to install the disc without the issue of the cassette tool hitting the axle adapter. I then repeated the process of installing the disc the same as the rear. It's the same size disc for my bike, front and rear, 160mm. Once this was done, I simply inserted the 12mm axle adapter back onto the disc side of the hub, and the wheel was completed. The next thing we're going to do is get the free hub body ready for the cassette. So I'm going to apply a very light smear of grease around the splines of the free hub body. This is just to stop any potential cold welding issues, say with the steel sprockets against the aluminium body, so it'll help prevent corrosion effectively, and will make maintenance and removal of the cassette easier at a future date. So the next thing I need to do is add a spacer onto the free hub body. This is because I'm going to be using a mountain bike cassette. This is because mountain bike and road cassettes are 1.8mm different in width, where the free hub meets the cassette. The cassette I've chosen to fit is a Shimano XT M8000 11-42 cassette. This isn't brand new. It might have like 700 to 1,000 kilometers on it, but it's in good condition, so I'll make use of it. As all the components of this cassette are loose at the moment, I can't do the fancy trick of installing the whole thing in one shot. I'm just going to pop them on individually and make sure I get all the spacers in the correct order. The cassette in position, I'm going to apply a little grease to the lock nut of the cassette to prevent any issues. Then snug it down by hand, ensuring it's not cross-threading. And once it's snugged down, I can torque it up to 14 Nm using a torque wrench. So with the wheels set up, I thought I'd just give you a quick guided tour of them in the bike. As you can see, got a nice grey Specialized Diverge in that sort of nardo grey. The orange WTB wheels really, tyres really pop against the grey, along with the really nice Hope Pebble hubs. As you can see, the 30C tyres are coming up pretty true to size. Moving on to the rear, the Dura Ace and the purple look great, I think, and there's a bit of free hub sound. So for all my patient watchers that have watched so far into the video, I'm going to give you a treat now and show you what the free hub sounds like at full chat in the bike stand. Okay, that's it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching. Come back to you in a couple of weeks with a full review on it. I want to get a good couple of 100 kilometers on these wheels to get any reliability problems out of the way if they have them, and I'll think about the rivals and why I went for these and the components and whatnot. So yeah, give me a couple of weeks, maybe 3-4, and I'll be there with a full review of these. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.